The marriage that ended twice, once with a bullet, once with a will. They said the tycoon died peacefully in his sleep. That was the official story, the one printed on newspapers, shared by relatives, whispered at charity dinners. A comforting narrative for people who prefer their tragedies neat and painless. But the truth rarely behaves that politely. Anyone who lived close enough to the tycoon knew peace was the last thing he would allow in his house. His life was defined by rivalry, secrets and money so old it smelled like iron. And marriages like his never end quietly. They end violently. They end with someone pulling a trigger or someone signing a document. In this case, both. The final night of his life began with elegance, a private dinner for two, a bottle of wine older than his wife, a toast that tasted like reconciliation. But beneath the chandelier's glow, beneath the music humming softly through the mansion, there was tension so sharp it could cut through glass. His wife noticed first, the way he stared at her a second too long, the way he asked questions he shouldn't know to ask, the way he smiled like someone who had already chosen the ending. She suspected something had shifted in him, but she never imagined he had uncovered the truth. Her truth. She married him for the same reason most people approached him: power. She thought she had perfected the performance of affection. She thought he believed her devotion. She thought he was too blinded by age to see past her carefully measured tenderness. But the tycoon had survived too many corporate wars to fall for the gentle hands of a woman trained in deception. He knew she had a lover. He knew she had forged signatures. He even knew she had access to documents that didn't belong to her. What she didn't know was that he had prepared for this betrayal long before she arrived. When the gunshot echoed through the house, it didn't sound like chaos. It sounded like inevitability. A single decisive crack that signaled the end of their marriage and the beginning of something far more complicated. The staff rushed toward the sound. The security alarms activated. And in the middle of the marble floor, the tycoon collapsed, bleeding from a wound that told a story no one wanted to read. His wife stood beside him, shaking hands, trembling voice, insisting she tried to stop whoever had broken in. But her eyes betrayed her before her words did. They held too much calculation, too much fear, too much hope. Because she didn't know that the tycoon, even as he took his last breath, had already written the final chapter. Hours before his death, he signed a new will. One no one expected. One no one asked to see. One that would unravel the entire household the moment the ink dried. A will that contained one clause so explosive, it would rip apart alliances, expose secrets, and drag every hidden truth into the light. His last act wasn't a confession. It was a trap, and she had stepped the bullet that told a different story. The police arrived before the blood even dried on the marble. Officers swept through the mansion with the urgency of men who knew the media would break the story before midnight if they didn't act fast. The tycoon's body lay where he had fallen, surrounded by shattered glass and a wine bottle that still dripped onto the floor. His wife stood off to the side, wrapped in a blanket she didn't need, pretending to tremble at the horror she insisted she had witnessed. But the detectives noticed the details she hoped they wouldn't. Her shaking stopped whenever she believed no one was looking. Her tears only appeared when someone new entered the room, and the blanket slipped off her shoulder twice, revealing a wrist with no marks from struggle. The lead detective crouched beside the body. He studied the entry wound, a clean shot, close range, deliberate. This was not the work of an intruder. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no disturbed furniture, no footprints on the polished floors except hers. The scene looked less like an attack and more like a story built by someone who wanted a specific conclusion, someone who rehearsed this moment, someone who believed she would walk away untouched because the world had always rewarded her performance. She paced back and forth, hands ringing dramatically, rehearsing her innocence. She told the officers the same line repeatedly. She heard a noise. She ran downstairs. She found him like this, but the detective noted what she didn't say. She never mentioned seeing anyone flee. She never mentioned calling his name. She never asked if he was still alive. Her version of events had gaps large enough for the truth to fall through. Then came the moment she feared most. The detective asked if she knew where her husband kept his gun. Her face tightened, too quickly, too visibly. She tried to mask it with shock, but the instinct had already revealed her. She claimed she didn't know he owned a weapon. The security chief stepped forward, expression stiff. He corrected her. The gun was registered. It was kept in a drawer in the study, a drawer only 2 people had fingerprints on, the tycoon and his wife. Her pulse jumped, her throat constricted. The detective watched every reaction, storing each one like evidence. He knew she was lying. She knew he knew. And yet she maintained the performance, because if she stopped, she would have to face the truth that terrified her more than prison. She was losing control. The staff whispered among themselves. They had seen the tension between the couple. They had heard arguments behind closed doors. They had watched her grow bolder as the tycoon grew older. Her charm had always felt calculated, her kindness rehearsed. Now the mask had melted under pressure. The chef crossed himself quietly. The maid looked away. The butler avoided her eyes altogether. People inside the house understood something the detective was just beginning to uncover. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was the ending of a marriage built on deception. Then something unexpected shifted the energy in the room. A lawyer arrived, not hers, his, an older man with a stern posture and a briefcase that seemed far too heavy for its size. He asked the detective for a private word. The detective hesitated, then stepped aside. They spoke quietly, far enough that she couldn't hear. But she recognized the expression on the lawyer's face. It was the look of someone carrying a truth no one was prepared to accept. Moments later, the lawyer requested everyone's attention. He announced that the tycoon had signed a new will just hours before his death. The air thickened. Conversation stopped. Even the detective paused his examination. The tycoon's wife felt her stomach plunge. A new will meant unpredictability. Her plan depended on the old one, the one she knew by heart, the one she had built her life around. Now the ground beneath her was shifting in real time. She forced a smile, forced innocence, forced composure. But she couldn't force the truth away, because according to the lawyer, the new will wasn't just revised. It was a message. A message the tycoon wrote knowing the bullet was coming. The will that didn't choose who everyone expected. The lawyer placed the briefcase on the center table as if setting down a bomb. No one spoke. Even the detective stepped back, recognizing that whatever was inside that case would shape the entire investigation. The tycoon's wife tried to steady her breathing, but her chest rose in shallow, panicked waves. She felt the walls closing in on her, as if the mansion itself were preparing to testify against her. The lawyer unlocked the case with 2 keys, one metal, one digital, and withdrew a single folder sealed with red tape. The staff watched with the kind of silent fear normally reserved for thunderstorms and verdict announcements. The wife took a step forward, attempting to appear composed, but the lawyer lifted a hand to stop her. His voice cut through the tension. Only those mentioned in the new will would be permitted to stand near the document. Her stomach twisted. She had assumed she was the primary beneficiary. She had assumed she would inherit everything. She had assumed control. But assumptions crumble quickly when built on deception. The lawyer began reading the introduction of the will. It was written in the tycoon's unmistakable tone, sharp, calculated, and painfully direct. He stated that someone in his own home had betrayed him, that the betrayal was not a moment but a pattern, that he had chosen to sign this final document because he no longer trusted the people who believed they stood closest to him. With each sentence, the wife felt her confidence crack like thin ice under heavy footsteps. Then the lawyer read the name of the first beneficiary, and the room stopped breathing. It wasn't her. It wasn't even a relative. It was an employee, a young assistant from one of the tycoon's lesser-known philanthropic departments, a woman who had worked quietly, loyally, without ambition or manipulation. Someone no one had suspected. Someone who had arrived earlier that day to drop off documents and was now standing stunned near the doorway, completely unaware that her life was being rewritten in front of the entire household. A wave of murmurs rippled through the staff. Shock, confusion, curiosity. The tycoon's wife felt her throat clench so hard she struggled to swallow. She glared at the assistant, hunting for signs of collusion, but the assistant looked terrified, overwhelmed, and genuinely confused. This was not a conspirator. This was a witness to her downfall. The lawyer continued. The assistant was granted a significant portion of shares and assets. Not all, but enough to tilt the balance of power away from the wife. Enough to dismantle her carefully constructed plan. Enough to make her fear she was losing everything she had schemed to possess. She snapped. She claimed the signature was forged. She accused the assistant of manipulation. She insisted the will was illegitimate. The detective watched her unravel, with the clinical eye of someone observing a confession in slow, unspoken motion. Her desperation exposed her guilt more efficiently than any interrogation could. The lawyer didn't flinch. He informed her that the signing had been recorded on video, witnessed, time-stamped, and filed securely. The tycoon had not drafted this will in fear. He had drafted it with strategy, clarity, and intent. He had prepared for her reaction. He had predicted it. Then came the clause that changed everything. The will stated that if the tycoon died under suspicious circumstances, all assets would be temporarily frozen and placed under the protection of a trustee until the investigation reached a formal conclusion. And the trustee he had chosen was not a family member, not a lawyer, not a business partner. It was the detective standing in the room. The decision was irreversible, binding, designed to ensure that the truth, whatever it was, rose to the surface. The wife felt her knees weaken. The detective straightened with newfound authority. And the assistant, the unexpected beneficiary, stood frozen, caught between fear and disbelief. The lawyer closed the folder slowly, letting the silence build weight. He looked at the wife with an expression that carried both pity and judgment. Her plan had relied on a clean narrative, a believable facade, but the tycoon had destroyed her script before she ever had the chance to perform it. And with one unexpected beneficiary, one frozen fortune, and one detective now in control, the entire game had shifted. The night they realized the tycoon never played fair, the detective did not react with triumph. He reacted with caution. Becoming the temporary guardian of a billionaire's empire was not a privilege. It was a burden, a dangerous one. He knew the wife would not surrender her future without a fight, and as he accepted the responsibility, she stared at him with a hatred sharpened by fear. Not loud, not reckless. The kind of hatred that plans silently. The assistant, the unexpected beneficiary, stood stiff as a board. She looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong room at the wrong time and was now trapped in a storm meant for someone else. She had never planned for wealth, never expected it, never imagined her name would carry the power to topple a marriage, a legacy, and a house full of lies. She took a step back when the wife's eyes landed on her, as if those eyes were capable of pulling triggers without touching a weapon. The lawyer announced there was one more clause. The room fell silent again. A clause reserved exclusively for cases involving betrayal. The wife's face tightened, a mask forming where her panic once showed. The lawyer read the line with the cold precision of someone who had practiced it. If the tycoon's death appeared to result from internal conflict, every camera, every recording, every locked drawer in the house was authorized to be opened and reviewed. The detective's lips parted. This was far beyond a simple forensic search. This was permission to dissect the household from the inside, to examine private safes, encrypted files, hidden notebooks, to question the staff freely, to ignore claims of privacy or grief. The tycoon had set the stage for his own investigation. He had known the danger was coming, and he had chosen to confront it using the only weapon he trusted: information. The wife stepped forward, voice thin but sharp, accusing the assistant once again of manipulation. The accusation fell flat. The lawyer revealed that the assistant had not even known she was included in the will. Her name had been added months before, quietly, strategically. The tycoon had not chosen her for loyalty or affection. He had chosen her because she was the only person in the entire estate with nothing to gain from his death. A neutral witness, a moral counterbalance, a mirror that reflected the truth without trying to distort it. Anger flushed through the wife's face. She turned her back on everyone, pacing in tight circles. The detective watched carefully. Her anger was real, but it wasn't grief. It was the panic of someone losing control of a narrative she believed she owned. Then the electrician arrived, a nervous man with trembling hands. He stepped into the room carrying a tablet connected to the mansion's central system. He asked for the detective, and his first words shattered the room's already fragile silence. The mansion had recorded something unusual, a power fluctuation, a micro outage that lasted less than a second, exactly at the time of the gunshot. The wife froze. The electrician explained that during the fluctuation, multiple systems switched to backup mode. Cameras, alarms, sensors, and backup mode stored data in a completely different archive, one the household had forgotten existed. The tycoon's security system was ancient, complex, and notoriously temperamental. But one thing it never did was lie. It captured everything, silently, stubbornly, without filtering emotion or motive. The detective demanded access to the backup archive. The electrician hesitated, not because it was forbidden, because it was overwhelming. The backup stored data that even the staff didn't know existed. Audio files, heat signatures, door pressure logs, exact timestamps of every step taken across the marble floors. A living map of the truth. The wife stepped backward until she hit the wall. Her breathing quickened. Her fingers curled into fists so tight her knuckles turned white. Everyone in the room saw it, the terror blooming in her eyes. Not the terror of a widow, the terror of someone whose entire plan was beginning to decay in front of her. The detective requested the file corresponding to the exact second the gunshot was fired. The electrician swallowed hard and nodded. His fingers trembled on the screen as he typed. Data began to load, slowly. Too slowly. The atmosphere twisted into thick anticipation. Staff members leaned forward. The assistant clasped her hands together. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The wife whispered a single sentence under her breath, so quietly she didn't think anyone heard. Please don't let him have recorded it. But he had. The tycoon always recorded everything. The footage that chose a side before anyone could speak. The electrician's tablet vibrated once, then displayed a blinking folder, backup archive, emergency mode. The entire room leaned closer. The wife stepped back. The detective instructed the electrician to play the file corresponding to the second the gunshot echoed through the mansion. A progress bar crawled across the screen, each percentage tightening the tension in the room like a wire about to snap. The video feed appeared grainy at first, the result of the ancient backup system, but the silhouettes were unmistakable. The study door, the tycoon, his wife, no intruder, no shadowy figure escaping through the window. Just the couple and a moment heavy with finality. The angle showed the side view of the room, enough to capture gestures, movement, tension, but not enough to reveal faces clearly. Yet the truth didn't need clarity to be horrifying. The tycoon's posture was calm, almost resigned. He leaned on his cane, speaking in a tone too soft for the backup audio to capture. His wife stood across from him, shoulders stiff, chin raised in defiance. Even through the distortion, their dynamic was clear. This wasn't a robbery. This was a confrontation. Years of secrets condensed into one silent standoff. Then the moment arrived. The wife reached into the drawer. The detective exhaled sharply. She insisted she was looking for paperwork, that it was her drawer, that she didn't know a gun was there. But the footage betrayed her. The hesitation, the way her fingers curled around the handle, the way her body shifted, tense, calculating. A woman doesn't reach into a drawer with that kind of precision unless she already knows what she'll find. The tycoon didn't flinch. He watched her with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this moment. Someone who had stopped expecting loyalty a long time ago. Someone who knew exactly how his story would end. As she raised the weapon, the detective paused the video. The wife stood frozen in the real world, trapped by her own movements on screen. She insisted she didn't pull the trigger. She insisted he lunged at her. She insisted the gun went off by accident. The detective remained silent. He pressed play. The footage continued. The tycoon stepped closer, not to attack, not to defend himself, to speak. His lips moved slowly, calmly. The wife's fingers tightened around the trigger. The detective froze the frame again. Her knuckles were white, her arm steady. A steady arm has intent. A steady arm has purpose. A steady arm does not fire accidentally. When he resumed the playback, the flash erupted across the screen. The tycoon fell instantly, sliding down the bookshelf behind him. The wife didn't scream, didn't rush to him, didn't drop the gun. She simply stood there for nearly 10 seconds, staring down at him, waiting. The room watched the footage in heavy silence. 10 seconds felt like 10 years. 10 seconds was enough to destroy any pretense of innocence. Only then did she toss the gun aside. Only then did she run to the hallway. Only then did she begin the performance that fooled no one. The assistant covered her mouth, shaken. The staff stared in disbelief. The detective stepped forward, his expression carved from stone. The wife reached for the nearest excuse, insisting the footage was manipulated, insisting the angle was misleading, insisting she had panicked. But the detective wasn't listening anymore. The truth had chosen its side. Still, something unexpected happened. The detective asked the electrician to rewind the footage, not to the moment of the shooting, but to the seconds before. He replayed the tycoon leaning in to speak. This time, he focused on the tycoon's hand, a small, barely noticeable motion. The cane, the pressure sensor in the cane's handle. The detective's eyes narrowed. The tycoon wasn't just waiting for the bullet. He was recording her reaction. The cane wasn't a cane. It was a trigger for the mansion's hidden surveillance. The wife's voice broke. She realized the truth before anyone said it out loud. The tycoon had orchestrated the entire encounter. He had known she would reach for the drawer. He had known she would choose the gun. He had known the will alone wasn't enough to stop her. And he chose to die with proof. The detective closed the footage. There was no more investigation. There was only consequence. The inheritance that hit harder than the bullet. The room remained frozen long after the footage stopped playing. The tycoon's wife kept insisting the angle was wrong, the recording incomplete, the timing manipulated. But the detective no longer needed to raise his voice or argue. The truth had spoken in a language only guilt could understand, and everyone in the mansion heard it clearly. He signaled for two officers to step forward. They approached the wife slowly, hands ready, but patient. She backed away like a cornered animal, demanding lawyers, claiming conspiracy, threatening lawsuits against anyone who dared touch her. But her outrage lacked weight. The tycoon had taken that from her long before his final breath. She looked around the room, searching for even one pair of sympathetic eyes. None met hers, not the staff, not the assistant, not the lawyer, not even the walls she once believed she owned. The officers placed her in handcuffs. For the first time that night, she truly trembled. But the story was far from finished. The detective turned to the lawyer. He asked him to proceed with the final clause of the will, the one legally bound to be read only after the cause of death was confirmed. The lawyer opened a second sealed envelope. The paper inside was handwritten, the tycoon's handwriting, sharp, precise, brutally honest. The letter began with a confession. He admitted he knew his wife never loved him. He admitted he had allowed the marriage because every empire, every dynasty needs an enemy close enough to expose its weaknesses. He explained that he had watched her lies evolve, studied her ambitions, timed her manipulations, not to punish her, to prepare for the moment she would reveal who she truly was. Then the letter shifted. The tycoon wrote that he had lived long enough to know that loyalty rarely comes from blood or vows. It comes from character, from the people who did the work without applause, the people who stayed steady when others chased shortcuts, the people who understood value because they had lived without it. He wrote the assistant's name next. The woman who had been shaking near the doorway slowly walked forward at the lawyer's request. Her eyes were filled with disbelief, but she obeyed. The tycoon had discovered something no one else knew. She was the daughter of an old friend he had once betrayed in business, a man he had promised to help, but abandoned in pursuit of ambition. The assistant's father died in quiet poverty. She grew up on the margins of the world. The tycoon dominated, and when she unknowingly applied for a low-level job at his foundation, she did something no one expected. She never complained. She never begged. She never weaponized her pain. She worked hard, silently. With integrity, the tycoon no longer recognized in himself. The letter described her not as an employee, but as the person he had hurt through neglect decades before. And he declared that restoring her future was the only redemption he still had the power to make. The lawyer continued reading, his voice steady. The tycoon had left her the majority of his personal assets, not all, but enough to free her from the life she had inherited, enough to wipe the stain of his past mistakes, enough to rebuild everything she had lost without ever realizing who had taken it from her. The assistant covered her face, overwhelmed. The entire room absorbed the moment like a revelation. Justice had not arrived through force or manipulation. It arrived through something far more rare, accountability. Then the letter turned cold again. The tycoon addressed his wife last. To the woman who married him for a throne she never earned, he left nothing. Not even a final insult. Just one sentence: "The bullet ended my life, but the will ends yours." The officers escorted her out of the mansion. Her screams echoed down the hallway, but no one followed. No one defended her. No one pitied her. The empire she tried to steal closed its doors behind her for the last time. The assistant stood in the center of the room, trembling, holding the letter with both hands. She had entered the estate that morning as an unknown. She would leave it as the heir to an empire built on tragedy, redemption, and one final act of brilliance from a man who understood power too well. The detective nodded to her with a rare softness. The lawyer bowed his head. The staff began to understand that the era of fear was over. The tycoon's will had rewritten the story, not with money, with truth.